So Dr. Nissim is a staff psychologist and co-director of the Caregiver Clinic at the Department of Supportive Care at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center. She's also an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto. Her research program aligns with her clinical focus on psychosocial needs of family caregivers and individuals with cancer. And you have a great name. And I just wanted to let you know that Nissim is miracles. In Hebrew, it's miracles. So how suitable it's for today. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Nissim to give her presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really nice to be here, and it's like the first time I'm with another Rinat in the room, so it's like can be better. So I'm here to talk to you about caregivers and caregiving. This is really my passion and something I've been doing definitely since 2017 when we started the caregiver clinic at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center. As you probably all know, so a lot of times we refer to family members or friends, anybody who provides informal care at home as the invisible backbone of cancer care. And I think this is something that is only growing, kind of the fact that healthcare systems need to rely on family members or friends to provide care at home and help patients at home, because we are moving more and more to outpatient care, and also because people live longer and longer with cancer. So that means that they need care at home longer and longer. What's interesting about caregivers is that they are not just our partners in care for us, for healthcare providers, they are also patients in their own right. When we think about cancer, we think about it not just as physical trauma, but also as psychological trauma. And in that respect, the trauma is shared. It's never limited to the person with the physical trauma. So everyone in the circle is experiencing their own psychological trauma. It's kind of like it's happening in the body of one person, but we are always, as human beings, we are always interrelated. We are always a unit. We are always more than just an individual. And what's interesting is that all the research out there that compared between patients and caregiver very, very consistently, I've never seen a research that found something else, finds that the levels of emotional distress, if you're measuring depression, if you're measuring anxiety, if you're measuring helplessness, reported by family caregivers are either equal or higher than those reported by patients. So we actually at Princess Margaret were the ones that did one of the first studies about this over a decade ago. And we asked patients with cancer that were recruited at Princess Margaret, we asked them to fill out questionnaires with all kinds of measures of emotional distress, including a measure of depression. And then we asked the primarily caregivers, mostly their spouses, to fill out the exact same questionnaires. And the spouses had double the depression than the patients. So we see that all the time. We also see it in regard to the most common symptom of side effects of cancer treatment, which is fear of cancer recurrence. So when you finishing cancer treatment, either the first concern or the second concern that people have after they complete a treatment is fear of cancer recurrence. That's very, very common for patients. But if you look at their family caregivers, you find again that they have the same or even higher levels of fear of cancer recurrence after completing treatment. So that's why we at Princess Margaret are so passionate about helping family caregivers. We really want to help them provide care, but we also think about them as our patients, are part of the patient population that we need to care for. That's why we have the caregiver clinic at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center, where I see family caregivers for one-on-one support. The reason we are providing one-on-one support is because we are very, very privileged in Ontario. We have a lot of great community organizations that provide support groups for family caregivers. So you're probably familiar with Wellspring or with Gilda's Club. There are other organizations as well. And everything they do, they also do for family caregivers. So we didn't want to duplicate what they're doing. We already have a really good structure of support system in the community, and we wanted to create something that is missing, which is the one-on-one support for family caregivers. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I learned from my clinical care and research program with family caregivers, but everything I'm going to say to you, I think, applies to patients as well. And again, like when I think about cancer, it's a family experience. It's always affecting a unit. So everything I say it's going to apply to everyone. We've been thinking hard about why caregivers have, the same or often higher levels of distress than the patients. And I think one of the main reasons is that family members they keep saying, I'm not the patient, I'm not the patient. So they keep feeling that, they shouldn't feel those feelings, or if they have needs, their needs are secondary, or they feel guilty about having distress because they're not the patient. Why am I upset? So we keep saying things to ourselves as family members, family caregivers, that we wouldn't say to anyone else, right? And I think that also applies to all human beings. We all have like an inner bully inside us that keeps criticizing our emotions, our actions, and so on. And we observe that as a caregiver, this inner bully tends to be louder. So, and the hard thing about it is that this inner bully, the judgment of our emotions, it actually just escalating our distress. It's depleting, it's energy that we're spending on criticizing ourselves that we can spend somewhere else. And that's something that is very, very natural. It's almost an instinct. We all do that, but it's unproductive. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we see family caregivers having equal to or higher distress than the patient. Another reason is that sometimes we call it self-silencing or protective buffering. Another reason that we think we see more distress in family caregivers is that caregivers tend to hide their concerns or distress to protect their loved ones. So it can be the patient or other family members. So it's not just criticizing our distress, but it's also this need to hide it because we don't want to upset our loved ones. And this is, it's natural. It's about, a motivation to protect. But studies that looked at protective buffering find that it's actually increasing distress, not just for the caregivers, but also for the patients. Because, and I think you will see it when I'm going to discuss all those distressing emotion, that the tragedy is that everybody are feeling the same distress. And if we're trying to protect each other by not sharing it, is that we have to tolerate it in isolation, right? We can't lean on each other. So I think that's why protective buffering, although good intention, is actually increasing distress for everybody. So these are those two common patterns that I believe can contribute to higher distress in family caregivers. And when we're talking about emotional distress in family caregivers, we're talking about first thing is fear. Second, grief, and then helplessness. So I'm going to kind of walk you through those three, the main three, and hopefully give you some strategies or different ways to think about those emotions that are different than, our instincts, which are unproductive, to either feel guilty about those emotions or to dismiss them or to hide them. So as I said, the number one concern is fear of cancer recurrence. That's a given in cancer. And that's because cancer, regardless of prognosis, cancer brings uncertainty. And sometimes the uncertainty is increased, but it's always there. So sometimes the intensity is increased, before scans or waiting for results or waiting for treatment decisions. Definitely when there are new physical symptoms, uncertainty increased. So, there is always uncertainty, and sometimes there are kind of peaks of uncertainty. And as human beings, we dislike uncertainty. We're not good dealing with uncertainty. One of the fascinating studies that I always like to share with patients and caregivers is this really cool study where they've given one group of patients, one group of subjects actually, was told that they may or may not get an electric shock, and another group of subjects was told that they're definitely going to get an electric shock. And the group that was told that they may or may not get the shock was actually more distressed than the group that was told that they're definitely going to get that shock. That's how much we dislike uncertainty. And that's how much it's distressing for us. And what's important to remember is that uncertainty by default brings both hope and fear. So you have to remember hope and fear always coexist. There is no hope without fear, and there is no fear without hope. They always go together. And what's interesting, I think, in the context of caregivers is that sometimes it's so hard for us to hold this duality of hope and fear that is created by uncertainty, that we kind of divide it. So it's very, very common to see this seesaw where, one person is carrying all the hope. They are the hopeful, they seem like they never think about, worst case scenario. And the other person is the one that is carrying all the fear. So a lot of times we see this imbalance, and a lot of times I see, but it's not always, that the patient is the one that is kind of projecting all the hope, and the caregiver is the one that is kind of carrying all the fears and all the what if and all of that. But that's just because it's so hard for us as human beings to carry both, to hold this duality. We tend to think, either hope or fear. It's so hard to remember and hold the fact that they always coexist. So that's one common mechanism that we see, how to manage it. And what we try to help people do, often as individuals, but also as a unit, is to hold it, to hold the duality. We call it double awareness, to be aware of both hope and fear at the same time, to know that we are always doing both. And that's really helpful, because another thing we tend to do sometimes is to feel like, if we're feeling hopeful, we judge it. We feel like, oh, does that mean I'm in denial? If we're feeling fear, we judge it too. We feel like, does that mean that I'm giving up? And that's not true. We are always holding both. You can be hopeful and have moments of fear, and you can have moments of fear and be hopeful. So this double awareness of holding this duality of help and hope and fear helps us, because it helps us not, feel stuck when we're feeling fear. Recognize that that's a wave, and there is always going to be hope coming after. The other thing that is important, and we try to encourage family caregivers to do, is to actually, when there is a wave of fear, to think about the what if. It's important to understand that there is duality of hope and fear, and in order for us to feel relief right now, we need to plan for both. We need to plan for the best, but also plan for the worst, and try to do both, not just one or the other. And from my experience, a lot of times, if we allow ourselves to think about the what if, or if we allow conversation about the what if to happen, there is a relief, and we can focus even more on planning for the best. Grief is another very, very common emotion. A lot of times we think about grief as something that starts when we lose someone. We don't think about grief this way. We think about grief as something that starts with diagnosis. And grief is very, very common, although it's often unexpected. Sometimes we're hit with grief in moments where we didn't expect to be hit. So for example, a lot of the patients that I see and family caregivers that I see, they feel a lot of grief at the end of treatment, because that's when you can really feel all the losses that happen. You're not as focused on just getting through the treatment. And grief is common because a cancer diagnosis means many, many losses. Some losses are tangible, changes in income, abilities, appearance, needing to be dependent. And some losses are not as tangible. So the illusion of certainty, the illusion of control that we all have, that we all need, a lot of times cancer takes it away from us. The vision that we all have for the future, now it's not a guarantee. We need to think about a new vision for the future. Sometimes there is also what we call anticipatory grief. All of a sudden, we're grieving a loss that we're anticipating may happen earlier than we ever thought it will happen. So there is a lot of grief that comes with a cancer diagnosis. And just like fear, just like any other emotion, positive or negative, grief usually comes in waves. Emotions are a wave. They're coming and going. And it's really important to label our emotions and kind of name them and recognize, oh, I'm feeling grief right now, and it's normal, it's okay, it's a wave, it will come and go. What's interesting, and I think that's especially with caregivers, a lot of times we see grief hidden. It's hiding underneath other emotions that are almost easier for us to feel, and that's guilt, anger, or regret. So I want to invite you that if you have moments when you feel intense anger, if they've done something differently, I wouldn't be in this position, or guilt, if I just did this, maybe we could have prevented the diagnosis or treat or whatever. I invite you to think about it as an illusion. It's our mind trying to restore the illusion of control retroactively. If maybe this would have done differently, I did it differently, someone else does it differently, we could have prevented something from happening. Where we don't have the control that we all want to have, we are just one small variable in many, many different, in a set of complex variables. And grief, it means that we understand that we don't have control. It really makes us feel out of control. And we're trying to restore this control by creating those illusions of, maybe something that I did or someone else did could have prevented something bad from happening. A lot of times when we feel this, especially if we feel it in an intense way and we can't let it go, it's because there is grief underneath it. And what's important also to know about grief is that when we are grieving, we always grieve all over again, all at once, for all of our losses. So a lot of times when we're grieving after a cancer diagnosis, it will bring back a lot of the losses from the past, and we grieve them all over again. Grief is difficult, but remember, it's always a wave. And we don't want to, it's not realistic to not have waves like that, but it is very realistic to learn to ride them out. We need to learn how to, we can go in and emerge from the other side. Lastly, I want to talk about helplessness, because I think that's very, very common for family caregivers. So this may be paradoxical, but as a family member, as a family caregiver, you have less control than the patient. Patients ultimately are going to decide what they're going to eat, how much they're going to drink, what they're going to ask the doctor, how they're going to call the doctor. And a lot of times as a family caregiver, it's very hard because you may have your own idea about what the patient should be doing. So it's really hard. You have less control. And also the problem that you really, really want to fix for your loved one, you cannot fix. And it's very hard. I always tell the caregivers that I see, helplessness is kind of a given as a caregiver, because the problem that you really want to fix, you can't fix. Two things to remember about helplessness. I think, if you feel stuck and you're feeling helpless, to remember that this is just the nature of reality. We all have a vision when we try to tackle a problem that, this is how it's going to be tackled and it's just going to be a linear line. And it's never like that. Things are always more complicated than we think. So we always need to remember that we are always moving forward, even if it doesn't look like the way we thought it's going to look like. So I want to encourage you, when you're feeling helplessness, to think about that, not just about all the things you didn't achieve, but also go back and think about, but I also already achieved all those other things. And this needs to be done actively and intentionally. What's important to remember is that, our brains, our minds, they were not designed to make us feel happy. They were designed to make us feel safe. And that's why we always notice what's wrong, what didn't work, what I didn't do, how much more I need to do, and so on. We need to intentionally make sure that we also pay attention to all the things we did accomplish, all the ways in which we did help each other, all the things that do go right in our lives. And we have to do it intentionally, because our brains are designed to have this negativity bias, to always notice what's wrong, what we need to fix. So this is my last slide. We talked about many difficult emotions, and I just want to leave you with a different message. I started talking about trauma and how cancer is always a psychological trauma. But one of the most interesting things about trauma is that trauma is not just about stress and fear and depression and negative outcomes. Trauma is always connected to also what we call post-traumatic growth. Trauma is how we grow and how we become better and resilient. So I want you to always think about that too. There is always not just post-traumatic stress, there is always post-traumatic growth as individuals and also as a family unit. So thank you so much for your attention, and please, if there is anything you want to ask me, I'm available now, but I'm also always available by email, and I would love to encourage you to also look at, email me or look at our Caregiver Clinic webpage at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center website. We have a lot of resources there for caregivers. Thank you very much.
Maybe it's more of a comment. I'm sure you deal with caregivers that partner or loved one has all different forms of cancers. But as I'm reading this and listening to you talk, I'm thinking, I guess just because we all have it, that there's something unique about multiple myeloma in terms of it being a relapse disease. And that uncertainty is even more so.
Yeah.
Unlike other, tumor cancers where, there's operation, maybe there's chemo or radiation, and it's the bell is rung, and every 5 years it's checked. This is constant. So this uncertainty of a relapse is heightened. I'm wondering if you could talk at all about that effect on patient caregiver and.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think that's a really good point. I think actually that so from my experience, it's true what you're saying, but I also see it when it's kind of seems cut and clear. There is always uncertainty with cancer, and you're always forced to think about, how you plan and how you live your life in a different way. But you're right, with myeloma, it's kind of like you don't have this, message to, you can just go back to normal that maybe other people with other types of cancer may be getting. So I think you're right, and I think it does, a lot of it is about this concept of double awareness. It's really about kind of learning to live with it, live with a different kind of planning. I need to have a plan A and have a plan B and have a plan C because all kinds of things can happen, So you do need to manage uncertainty all the time. And I'm sure you all know that it's feasible, but you need to learn a different way of planning because the uncertainty is always there. Does it answer your question? Yeah.
So, like the caregivers, there's one thing that we as patients, we are sick. Typically, a lot of us will stop working. But caregivers, on the other hand, and I'm not sure it's so clear, they need to keep the routine. They need to go to work. They actually have more pressure even to bring more money all of a sudden home, which they have problems because sometimes they need to accommodate us to appointments, to when we're very sick. What do you see there?
That's such a good point, and I'm sorry. I think you're right. I should address that too because you're right. And a lot of times, what I say is kind of it's all of a sudden you have a new full-time job in addition to all the other full-time jobs, or sometimes you need to also take the jobs that the patient was used to do and kind of now it's your responsibility too. Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And I think it does add maybe to a lot of caregivers feeling more distress than the patient. Thank you for this point. I think, a lot of what we do with caregivers, for example, is about kind of help them figure out what's the most important, what are the priorities in this moment, and what are the things that I have to let go of, So this is, all of a sudden I have this new full-time job. How do I manage that? Are there things I can delegate? Can I take a break? And it does mean that you need to strategize and think about things in a new way. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really good point.
Really, I'm glad you left that slide there. I'm really like this idea of the double awareness that you're talking about. It's possible, but it's hard. it's really difficult to get to that. I mean, I guess that's really what. How do we get there?
Yeah, I think I agree, and it's you really need to kind of train your mind to do that. A lot of times I think about it as like going to the gym. Like if you go to the gym, you're kind of trying to get fit physically, But here it's like you need to be fit mentally, you know, to live with uncertainty, you really need mental fitness for that. And it is possible to train your mind, but just like if you stop going to the gym, you're going to lose the physical fitness, right? So it's like, it's the same idea. You have to keep at it. You have to train yourself every day. One of the most evidence-based approaches for this mental training that we know of is mindfulness. I don't know how many of you are familiar with mindfulness-based stress reduction program, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy programs. They're all offered also through Wellspring or Gilda's Club. I often recommend them because they are really good ways to sign up for that gym and learn these ways to train your mind, to think differently, to live with uncertainty. And again, part of it though is just like going to the gym. You have to keep at it. You have to keep training. And when you have, for example, you know, even if you go to a mindfulness training program and you just get one habit from it and you just use it every day, it can help. It can help. A lot of times, it can prevent distress because you know how to live with uncertainty better, and it's also going to make you, when there is peaks of uncertainty, you're not going to react to it in an intense way because your mind will know what to do. It's a lot of it is about this training that you need. Yeah.
I have a comment and a question.
Yeah.
First off, thank you for making me and most of us aware of the level of stress and emotional pain that the caregivers will. I wasn't aware that I was right out there with the patient itself. Thank you for that. And the question I have is, have you got another word, and I never thought of grief as emotion so much. But can you give us one word that would be like the synonym for grief?
Oh, that's so interesting. Why are you thinking about that? Why do you think about?
Well, I never thought of grief being an emotion so much. But a word that's come to my mind is sadness. Would that be similar? Grief.
Yeah, I see what you're saying because it's kind of, there is a cognitive element there. Is that what you're thinking about? Yeah, yeah. Well, English is my second language, so I will need your help here.
I don't know. I would think it's like a deeper sadness. I mean, it's just, when I'm thinking of the two words, I think of sad as kind of momentary or fleeting. You feel sad when somebody shares certain news with you, or you see something or hear something happen. Grief is kind of like, there's a heaviness to it, and like a, not a burden, that's something here. It's hard for me. That's where Google comes. That's when you your phone. Google some words. Oh, look, see?
ChatGPT.
There's some synonyms for grief: sorrow, misery, sadness, anguish, pain, distress.
Interesting.
And maybe sadness for loss.
Sadness.
Specific. Yeah. Something.
Yeah.
I want to, so really thank you for being here today and for allowing everybody to feel in this, like we are all in the same boat. We can't go for the same. But I really want to ask you, guys, I saw the slides before you, so that's why I really want to ask you to go back to the last slide. And actually, it's like an amazing slide. And to talk a little bit, because it's a strategy, to really tell us a little bit more about it. And I feel that it's relationship with the world, between people and with the world. And you can elaborate on that. think this is a lot of hope.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying. I mean, I think we're all more resilient than we think, and these are the moments where we really see it, right? Because it's so common. It's interesting about fear and anxiety because so if you do studies that have been done where they look at fear or anxiety over time, they see two peaks, two increases in anxiety, which is before treatment starts and then after treatment ends. And it's so interesting because before treatment starts, you know, it's this unknown and we always think we can't do this. How is it going to happen? We don't understand that we're resilient and we're going to get through whatever comes our way. So I think maybe that's the lesson that, you know, we realize through going through this that we are resilient, and it's really important to maintain this knowledge, I guess, not to forget it, because what we see is then there is another thing, and then we feel like, oh, but if this happens again, or if these things happen, I won't be able to cope. No, you coped with this really hard thing before that you thought you're not going to be able to cope with. So remember that. Remember it for next time. You're more resilient than you think. And you're stronger and you're better because you've gone through this, right? So you already learned a lot. I think, you know, probably all of you, I think part of the reason I like support groups so much, and I'm always so grateful to be invited, is because I'm with a group of experts. You all learn so much. You have so much knowledge from this experience that you're coming here to share with each other. And that's important to remember. You know, I'm kind of becoming an expert in this. I know so much. I can get through the next one too, whatever comes my way. Because it's not just cancer, right? Life, you know, one of the great books about mindfulness, by the way, is called The Full Catastrophe. And basically they're saying life is just one big catastrophe. So, you know, things are going to happen all the time, and we are resilient, and we're going to be able to get through them. Yes?
I want to mention something that Rinat kind of alluded to in the beginning. I'm a patient, and before we got diagnosed, maybe a lot of us were caregivers ourselves, you know, look after our parents, our children, our husbands, or whatever. I find the big thing of what you're trying to say here, or what you're trying to, you know, teach us and, you know, remind us, is that there is a caregiver's guilt, anxiety, and stuff like that. But even as a patient, we used to be caregivers, and some of us still feel like I still need to take care of, you know, my spouse and my family and stuff like that. Even though I'm the one going through it, I still get all of those things that you're saying as a caregiver.
Yes.
So I don't know if there's.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is so superficial, right? To say one person is the caregiver, and, you know, because we're all, you know, we're a unit. And I think it's maybe about kind of recognizing that, you know, it doesn't matter if you're the person with the physical trauma, with the disease, you still have a lot of ways to provide care. You're just going to do it in a different way, you know? So kind of, it's about kind of, you know, I think as a patient, you may feel a lot of helplessness too, because you can't be the caregiver that you used to be. But it's kind of about, okay, so maybe I can't do it this way, but I can do it another way. So it's about kind of, you know, coming up with a different way of doing this. Because absolutely, you know, we're all caregivers in a way, and also a lot of caregivers, you know, may have their own medical illnesses. So just, you know, so it's, you know, it's very superficial, those definitions. Thank you for highlighting that.
Well, thank you so much for the awesome presentation. Although I don't have a caregiver at home, believe me, from day one of my cancer, multiple myeloma journey, and that's what it is, it's a journey. I've had family and friends, very close friends, and you get to know who your friends are when you go through something like this, and they make sure that I'm okay. Give you an example of that, driving down today from Newmarket. I'm talking to my sister-in-law, the first thing out of her mouth, I'm so sorry I haven't been able to talk to you in the last 3 or 4 days. I've been busy with this and that. And are you okay, Bob? I said, I'm okay, Sandra. Are you sure? I'm okay, Sandra. I will let you know if that's otherwise. So I know you're blessed with a caregiver at home, and that's awesome because as Rinat said earlier, and the thing that was told to me the first consult many years ago at Princess Margaret, the nurse said, Bob, you can't do this by yourself. Gave me a brochure for this group and for Myeloma Canada. And, it's just been great that I have them there. I'm thinking about one of the parts of the presentation today about the electric shock, which is, I think, we'll all relate to that about 2 or 3 seconds before a bone marrow biopsy. Yeah. So thank you. And we're just going to thank you for your presentation and organizing the slides, taking the time out of your very busy schedule. We really appreciate that. And we would like to present you with a modest gift of Canadiana pottery. Notice I didn't say American, okay? Very important these days. So thank you very much.